trusting God boldly with the gospel. I don't know of any theme that probably is more than this one. When I think about the gospel, Mark was the first one to write about the gospel in his book. Mark is probably the earliest of the four gospels. The church fathers called it Peter's memoirs, and I believe that's exactly what it was. He was a companion of Peter. If you go over to 1st and 2nd Peter, you see John Mark is with him. But John Mark begins with the Holy Spirit inspiring him to say the beginning of the good news. And notice I've got that in the word gospel in parentheses here, because the old King James simply put the word gospel there. Gospel's become a religious word. Unfortunately, a lot of people, when they use it, they'll say something to the effect of, well, that's the gospel truth. I don't even know what that means, because that's not what the word gospel means. But gospel has become a religious word. In the New Testament, it was just a very common word that meant good news. And so Mark begins this gospel with the beginning of the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. Verse 14, after John was put in prison, Jesus went into Galilee proclaiming the gospel, the good news of God. Mark 16, 15 and 16, Jesus said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Notice that. Now, why the NIV kept the word gospel here, not good news, I don't know. NIV does that sometime, but it's the same word used in chapter 1. And notice that. Preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. I mean, that is the story of the Bible. To understand the gospel, however, the good news, we have to go back to the beginning. Genesis chapters 1 through 6 are some of the most important chapters in the entire Bible. We have a word we call philosophy. A lot of people will major in philosophy when they go to college. And philosophy is all about the questions of life. Who are we? How did we get here? What is our purpose in this world? It literally means a lover of wisdom. But if you go back to the opening chapters of the Bible, we find God answering those basic questions of philosophy. For instance, who is God? What did He create? What does it mean to be human? Why are we here? What's our purpose for existence? I mean, is work important in life? What about good and evil? And then, of course, the ultimate question, what about life and death? Those are all explored in these opening 6 chapters. In fact, when you turn to them, here's what's fascinating about these 6 chapters. They begin with these words. God had started creation. On the 7th day, He looks at everything that He made, and He says, it is very good. I want you to think about that. It's very good. I think about this picture right here. Anybody see this last week? This is from the Artemis II mission. First time in over 50 years. I want y'all to think about that. Over 50 years, we've gone around the moon. By the way, just out of curiosity, how many of you remember when we went around the moon the last time? Okay, about half the audience, right? I mean, a lot of us remember that. I saw this picture and I thought it's incredible. I mean, by the way, when the Artemis II astronauts got back, they said it was good to be home. I want you to look at the moon. We keep saying we're gonna build a station on the moon. I don't know about you. I don't see any trees there. I don't see any green grass. I don't see any oceans. I don't see any clouds. I know to explore the rest of the solar system, we've got to go there, but I'm not going to sign up. I'm not. I'm out on this one. I mean, when I see that, that's what God saw. And God said it's very good. But then look at what you get to when you get to chapter 6. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, on that beautiful thing God created, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart were only evil all the time. I want y'all to look at the words here. Every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart. Evil all the time. I mean, how in the world do you go from the first one to this one? And look at God's response to it. And the Lord regretted that he had made human beings. He had made us. He regretted that. And his heart was deeply troubled. And so you ask yourself, how did we move from very good to God being deeply troubled? And that's why these opening 6 chapters are so important. They're this incredibly constructed narrative that traces where sin came from its first whispering temptation. I love that line there. From its first whispering temptation, all the way through to its full catastrophic expression in a civilization so thoroughly corrupted that only a flood could reset it. You know, we heard a lot this last week of destroying an entire civilization. We're in this conflict with Iran. And one of the things is you either open up the Straits of Hormuz, or we're going to wipe you out as a civilization. Well, first of all, I don't think there's any human being who can wipe out a civilization. But there's a God who can. And with the exception of Noah and his wife and their 3 sons and their wives, he wiped out an entire civilization. Why? Because of how evil it had become. Now, this is going to be a 2-part lesson now and next week in setting up, looking at this concept of the gospel. And there's 5 movements in it. And so we're going to look at the first 2 today. Movement number 1 is the world that God made. I mean, when you turn over to Genesis 1, here's the words you see repeated over and over again. It was good. 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 Every few verses, it was good. Until you get to the 7th day and God looks at it and says, it's very good. The world that God created is a perfect world, or at least it was. And that's the way it began. And what's amazing about it is that in the middle of that perfection, the pinnacle of his creation was us. We were the pinnacle. God looked at God looked at the Son and the Holy Spirit and said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. Notice those words there, image and likeness. It's not unusual for someone to look at a child of, a mom or a dad and say, whoo, they're a spitting image of their mom. They're a spitting image of their dad. My brother, he's got 1 son, and let me tell you, you can take their high school pictures and put them side by side, and I don't know if you can tell the difference. I mean, there's no denying my brother's son. Now, on the other hand, me and June, people look at my 2 boys when they're standing beside me. Me at 5'7", they're at 6 foot tall. And people say, where'd they get their height? And I said, I don't know. That's what bothers me. Actually, I do know June's dad. By the way, the first time I ever met June's dad, he was working on a car. He stood up. I looked up, and I'm like, I'm in trouble. I mean, he was 6'5", 260, 70 pounds, monster of a man. One time he looked down at me. Well, let me rephrase that. Every time he looked down at me, but this one time he looked down at me and he said, Les, I appreciate the way you treat my daughter. And I said, thank you. You better keep treating her that way. I said, yes, sir. He wasn't joking. To be created in someone's image. Wow. We were created in God's image. So he created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And look at the words here, that they may rule. Another likeness of God is that he created us to rule. He rules. He created us to rule under him. And he gave us this planet to rule over. That's what it means to be created in the image of God. God created us to be in a relationship with him. I can't overstate that. We were created to be in a relationship with God, reflecting his glory into creation as we rule over the things he created. In other words, he placed us on the earth and says, now I want you to reflect back to me glory in the way that you manage the world that I've created. And it's from that relationship that we get our identity and our purpose in life. Think about the way we identify ourselves. I mean, if you introduce yourself to someone, who do you tell them you are? Sometimes it's, I'm a preacher. We men, oftentimes, we talk about our occupations. For a lot of women, it's, I've got 3 children. It's family, where they find their identity. For some, it's being, someone famous, You know, right now, like I said, it's the Masters, and you got all these world-class golfers who are playing, and they're known for setting records and for winning master tournaments. I mean, somebody's name will go on this big trophy later today. I mean, some people identify by what they do in life. We identify in a lot of ways. God wants us to identify first and foremost about being created in His image. That's where we get our identity, as people who reflect the image and character of our God. And God began by crafting us out of dust, out of dirt. I mean, He formed Adam, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living being. And when He did this, God, after creating him out of the dust, placed him in a garden, gave him work to accomplish, provided him with a companion. I mean, isn't companionship wonderful? I mean, He gave Adam a companion, and then He set the boundaries of this relationship with remarkable generosity. There always needs to be boundaries. Boundaries in life. Every time I do premarital counseling, I say to a couple who are getting married, now you've got to establish boundaries between you now and your relationship with your parents. Because you're entering into a different relationship. You're entering into a relationship where you're loving someone second only to your love for God, which means that your parents need to step back away from that and allow you to be a spouse to someone else. And that comes with boundaries. By the way, oftentimes I know if there's boundaries set by seeing who's running the wedding. You know, I've had couples say, well, you know, my mom wants this in the wedding. I said, I didn't know I was marrying your mom. Oh, you're not. You're marrying us. Then why is your mom setting the boundaries of how you do your wedding? Or your dad setting the boundaries? You know, I mean, we have to set boundaries. God set boundaries, but they're within a remarkable generosity that He's given to us. Notice what He says, Genesis 2. You are free to eat from any tree in the garden. The first characteristic that makes us like God is our ability to choose. We are free. Adam and Eve was free to eat from any tree in the garden. But then He says, but I want to give a caution. There's a boundary here you don't need to cross. For you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Now I want you to think about a garden with I don't know how many trees. But it's a lot of trees with a lot of fruit from which they could eat. And they were free to eat from any of it, but boundaries set around one of them. And God said, I want you to respect that one. I don't want you to eat from that one, because if you do, then something's going to happen to our relationship. Which leads us to movement number 2, the first sin. Genesis 3 begins with the introduction of sin into a very good creation. You need to get those two words in your mind. Sin comes into play here. And sin isn't simply rule breaking. If there's a lesson you take away from today's lesson, please take this one away. And that is that sin isn't just breaking rules. It's not just eating a forbidden fruit. That's what I think a lot of us fail to realize about all sin. Sin instead is about the destruction of something that was glorious, beautiful, and good. Let me read that again. It is the destruction of something that was glorious, beautiful, and good. If the next time you sinned, if you paused long enough to ask a question, who is this hurting? What relationship is this hurting? I wonder if you would go through with the sin. Let me ask you a question. What's the one relationship you'd hate to destroy? Would it be your spouse? June and I have been married. This year will be 47 years. But I want to do something that would destroy 47 years worth of work. Maybe a parent. I used to tell people when I was a teenager, I wasn't so afraid of doing something bad that I'd be thrown in jail. I was afraid of dishonoring my dad. I didn't want my dad to have to come get me out of jail. By the way, Dad always said if I got in jail not to call him, he wouldn't come get me out, so there you go. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. What about the grandkids? Would you want to destroy a relationship between you and your grandkids? Blake, are grandkids good? Blake's got 2 now. You know, he used to come in to church all gloomy and sad. I'm serious. He'd come in just drooping. And then all at once one day he came in. I'm like, what in the world? And he says, it's grand, isn't it? Oh, grandkids. You know, I mean, yeah, he's a happy guy now. And I guarantee you, Blake wouldn't want to do anything to destroy the relationship with his grandchildren. Sin doesn't just burst on the scene. It's the deliberate step-by-step process that begins long before the forbidden fruit is ever touched. When you go to Genesis 3, this serpent appears in the garden, and he says, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? The first thing he does is he casts doubt, creates doubt. Did God really say this? That you can't, that you must not eat from any tree in the garden? And of course, that's not what God said. Eve says, oh no, we can eat from any tree in the garden, but the tree in the middle of the garden, we can't eat from it. We can't touch it. God didn't say you can't touch it, but she adds that to it. But the first thing that Satan does is he creates doubt. He wants us to question God. And of course, after Eve had responded, he says, you will not certainly die. I mean, contradicts the very thing that God said after he has created doubt in her mind. That's the big lie. The big lie. Now remember that phrase because I'm going to come back to it here in just a moment. In John's gospel, Jesus says, you belong to your father the devil, talking about the religious leaders. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he's a liar and he's the father of lies. I mean, Satan wants to deceive us into thinking that God is somehow the liar. God is the one who's telling us the big lie. God's the one who doesn't want us to enjoy life. He's the one whose motive is messed up, not Satan's. Notice what he says to him. For God knows when you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God. Look at that phrase, you'll be like God. All you got to do goes back to chapter 1, and God has already said, I created you like me in the beginning. By the way, that's why God forbid the Israelites, or in fact anyone, to make a graven image of him. I mean, you remember the second of the commandments? You shall not make any graven images. Why? Because God's made the only image the world needs. Look in the mirror. You're it. I'm it. We're the image of God. There's no other way to demonstrate him to the world than through us. And so here is Satan lying to Eve, saying, you'll be like God. You'll know good and evil. At the heart of every temptation is the big lie that God cannot be trusted. You can't trust God. And if we'd just pause and ask when we're tempted, what lie is Satan feeding me? Because behind every sin, every single solitary sin is a big lie. Somehow Satan's trying to convince us that God is withholding this from you. It's kind of like when you're a kid and your mother's just baked those hot chocolate chip cookies, puts them in a jar, and then sets them on top of the refrigerator. Why would she do that? I mean, she does it because she doesn't want me to have a hot chocolate chip cookie. That's why, right? I mean, my mother's to blame here, not me. I mean, the fact that I find a chair, drag it up there, climb on the chair, climb up on the counter, knock off the cookie jar and break it is not my fault. My mother shouldn't have hid that or put that cookie where I couldn't get to it. The big lie. What's the one he whispers to you? What's the one that he keeps getting you with? I suspect we all could answer that one. Wouldn't probably take us 15 seconds. We can write it down because he comes after us over and over. Satan knows I fooled him once, I fooled him twice, I'll fool him a third time. We all believe the lie. Notice what the text says. When the woman saw when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, basically what we call the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, she took some of it and ate it. And then I want you to notice the next part. She also gave some to her husband who was with her. You ever notice that phrase? Who was with her? Because that tells us that there's something else going on in this temptation that oftentimes we miss. You see, the passive complicity, and I want to emphasize that phrase there, of the one who should have spoken is as spiritually deadly as the active transgression of the one who reached out her hand. I grew up in the 60s. It's when I was a child, teenager in the 70s. I grew up in a time known as segregation. There was a lot of racial violence going on in the nation. I still remember when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, which was about 50 miles from where I was raised. I still remember hearing about it. I still remember being afraid of it. I grew up in a family that my dad, he was not a racist. He was not. But as I look back to my dad's generation, many of them who were good people, it wasn't that they were racist. It's just that they wouldn't say anything about it. They wouldn't speak out against it. They wouldn't stand up and be heard. It's that passive complicity that marked, I think, that generation that bothers me so much. And here's my fear. Here's my fear. What am I doing right now in this generation of where I know it's wrong? I know I need to scream at the top of my voice that it needs to stop, but for whatever reason, I'm being passively complicit in it. That's what scares me. What will my grandchildren 50 years from now say? Our pops wasn't such and such. It's just he was passively complicit in it. You see, that's what Adam did. And it was just as deadly as the active transgression of Eve. And the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked. You go back to chapter 2:25, they were naked, and it didn't matter. There was no shame. Now there's shame. Their eyes are opened all right, but not the way they needed to be opened. They're not opened in a good way. They're opened in a horrible way. This perfect world has now been messed up. And so they sewed fig leaves together. Boy, aren't you glad we upgraded to real clothes? I mean, I don't know if there's enough fig leaves out there. And so they tried to cover themselves. Why? Because of the shame they felt. And then the Lord came in the afternoon. He came like he evidently had on many occasions before. Come on, let's take a walk. Do you like walking? Do you like going? June and I started something during COVID that we still do. We did it last night. When we couldn't go out and visit with people, we started going down at Neely's Bend. We live on Neely's Bend, and you go down, and it's more farmland as you get down there. A lot of wildlife down there. And we just started going down there looking at wildlife. We still do it. We've been doing it now for, 6 years? And we go down, and we count the deer, and we count the skunks, and we count the raccoons, and we count the cats, and we count, the horses. I mean, it's just beautiful land down there. And we just go down there, and it's just about, we watch for the birds. The does will be bringing their phones out soon. And it's always a good time when we see the phones for the first time. It's a way for us to reconnect with what God's created. It's beautiful. Unfortunately, they weren't ready to walk with God that day, and they hid from Him. The Lord said, "Where are you?" By the way, when He said, "Where are you?" He knew where they were. He's asking them, "Where are you?" Do they know where they were? And notice the man, after they admitted that they had eaten the forbidden fruit, the man said, "The woman you put here with me." Right off the bat, what does Adam do? He blames God. Isn't that the way we are? It's always somebody else's fault. It's not my fault. It's my wife's fault. It's my kid's fault. It's somebody here at church's fault. It's God's fault. Somehow we have a way of blaming God. when we get messed up by sin. And she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate it. But God, you're the one that gave me the woman, so it's your fault. Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat. Cursed is the ground because of you. For dust you are, and to dust you return. I molded you, if you remember that picture a while ago. I molded you out of just wet dirt. Now you're going to go back to it. But it's not just that. Notice the language here. Cursed is the ground. It's not just that the dirt itself is cursed. It's that creation is cursed. Paul will look at this over in Romans chapter 8, and he'll say all of creation has been subjected to the slavery of decay. That's the world we live in. It's a fallen world. Why? Because that's what our sin does to it. It's not just what Adam's sin did to it or Eve's sin did to it. It's what my sin does to it, and it's what your sin does to it. The point I'm trying to make, y'all, is that sin has far more ramifications than we could ever imagine. The sin I commit, it's not Adam and Eve's fault. It's my fault. It's your fault. It's all of our fault as people who have rebelled against God and oftentimes continue to do so. That's why we desperately need hope. God then turns to to the serpent and says this about the serpent and the woman. And I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, and he'll crush your head, and you'll strike his heel. Dennis said this in the communion talk. Dennis, I thought you was going to ruin my lesson there for a second. Dennis said, go back to Genesis 3, and that's where you find what's called the proto-evangelium. Proto means first, evangelium means gospel. It is the first good news, the first gospel announcement that sin is not going to win. That's why it's called good news. I don't know where you're at in your life today. I don't know if you have trusted God boldly with the gospel. If you haven't, we want to give you an opportunity to do that. We're going to explore what all that means over the next several weeks. I'm excited, like I said, about this series. But before we can get to the good news, we've got to deal with the bad news. The bad news is we need Jesus desperately bad. I mean, when Dennis was reading from Isaiah 53, you had it all right there in that one chapter. God has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Therefore, he is the one who can set us free from it. If you need to be set free, why don't you come and let us help you do that. Right now, as together we stand and sing.